Alrighty. All right, hi, and welcome to Fashion Made Live. On today's Periscope, I'm going to teach you how to make a really easy circle skirt, and I'm also going to show you one of the modifications that you can do to kind of elevate your skirt and really look into the different things you can do design-wise. So first things first, if you're making a skirt for yourself, the one measurement that you're going to need is your waist circumference. So how large is your waist all the way around? For this, I recommend grabbing a piece of twill tape, something non-stretch. I don't recommend that you use elastic when you measure your waist. If you've got a measuring tape, that's awesome. I find it actually a little bit easier and more accurate to just go ahead and mark where your waist is first with something non-stretch and then measure the circumference later. So I'm going to start with like my piece of twill tape, which is a non-stretch material. And then your waist measurement, your true waist is the smallest part of your torso between your bust and your hips. So if you're not sure where it is, just go ahead and find out where your hands kind of come closest together on your waist. Should be about maybe an inch above your belly button, just around there. Once you've found that, just go ahead and grab your non-stretch. In my case, I'm using twill tape, but you can use, there's actually a wide variety of things you can use. As long as it doesn't stretch, you'll be fine. So go ahead and put that right around your waist. And I'm going to use just a straight pin. You can also use a safety pin to hold it in place. And then just make sure it's right around the middle. Let's see, okay, so I think I'm pretty close to where my true waist is. And when you measure your waist, as you can see, I'm wearing a pair of leggings and a really tight shirt. You want to use something like that, over your body to get a true measurement of your waist. You don't want to, be wearing a really loose shirt when you measure it because your measurements aren't going to be accurate. So get down to some underwear, wear leggings and a tight shirt, and you'll be fine. So now that I know where that is, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put a mark on my tape where the pieces meet so that I get the full waist circumference. Now, to make the circle skirt that I'm showing you in this tutorial, you need to have a front piece of the skirt and a back piece of the skirt. So the easiest way, well, I should say not easiest, but the most accurate way to get these two pattern pieces right is you want to make sure that you have your front waist measurement. That is the measurement from in my case, the left side to the right side of the waist. For some people, your front waist measurement and your back waist measurement might be two different numbers. Actually, for a lot of people, that's true regardless of your body size or shape. So what I'm going to do is I just made a shirt for myself, so I'm going to use the seam lines of my shirt as my point of reference. I'm going to make a little mark here on the left side, front, and then I'm going to make another mark on this side. So whatever the measurement is from here to here is going to be my front waist. Whatever the measurement is from here to here, it's going to be my back waist measurement. So let me go ahead and take this off, and then I'm going to measure these measurements with my measuring tape, and then I will show you how we are going to draft the pattern. And today I actually got some really great tools from a company that makes an amazing tool called the CurveRunner. You'll see me use this tool in action. It's effing amazing. I'm also, in a first, going to keep the cursing to 5 curse words or less. It's going to be difficult. I don't know why it's so difficult. I live in LA. It's a part of life to hers. Let's see. All right, let's go. Okay, so now I've got my twill tape that I used to make my waist measurements. So I'm going to go ahead and take my measuring tape and measure what the back waist measurement is. So I get 13 inches. All right, so I got 13 inches on the back waist. And let me measure the full waist circumference. There's my other mark. Okay, so there's one mark, there's my other mark. So from there to there, so that full waist measurement is, I get 28.5 inches. I don't know if you can see that. Okay. Now I've also got my back waist measurement, and let me double check the measurement. Remember, sewing is a lot like woodworking. Measure twice, cut once. So let me do a second measurement just to make sure my measurements are true, and I get 13.25 inches for the back waist. Now for the front waist, is going to be the waist circumference less the back waist measurement. So in our case, we're going to get 15.25 inches. So these are the measurements that we're going to need to do the next step in the process. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to identify I'm using muslin for this step of the process. I will not be using pattern paper, although you can use pattern paper if you want. It is the same process, just a different material. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark where my grain line should run. On my YouTube channel, there is a video explaining what the grain line is, how to find it, and all the good stuff about it. You can go ahead and refer to that. For the purposes of brevity, go ahead and watch the YouTube video. So on my material, my grain line runs this way. There's also another grain line that runs perpendicular to that one. So these are true grains. When I'm making my circle skirt, I'm going to go ahead and obey these grain lines when I start to lay out my pattern. So those are what I've marked in this lovely pink color. So the first thing that I'm going to do when I'm drafting my circle skirt is I am going to use the measurements that I took earlier, the waist circumference, the back waist, and the front waist, to help me make my measurements. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and draw a line right across to mark the top of the pattern piece. So you don't have to use anything too fancy. A straight edge is fine. So let me give myself some allowance here. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw this mark right across the top of my material that I'm using to draw the pattern. So this line is going to be kind of the basis for the front part of the skirt that we're going to be making. So in the interest of making the pattern efficiently, I'm going to draw the pattern such that when I cut it out, I can cut it on the fold of my material and save myself a little bit of time when I'm cutting out the pattern later. So I'm going to grab this lovely tool. So this is from a company called Luna Graphics. They're awesome, and one of the reasons I really like their measures and their curves is they're not white. They're actually this really cool shade of neon. So for me, it actually makes it a little bit easier for me to figure out where the tool is. Obviously, you can see it on this material, but when you get darker materials or materials with weird textures, my other French curves like this one tend to disappear. This one, it is super obvious where this is. So I really like working with that. So what I'm going to do to mark the front waist is I'm going to use my front waist measurement. So I figured out that that front waist measurement is 15.25 inches, which is great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to divide this measurement into two. So I'm going to get 7.75 inches, 7.625 inches is 1/2 of the front waist measurement. Actually, let me write that in. So you can see it if you're following along at home. So it's 7.625. All right, and why do we need to know that this is 7.625 inches? Well, because it makes it really easy for us to draw an accurate curve up here. And this is going to form the top part of our circle skirt. So this is going to be the front part that meets with our waist most immediately. So take another thing. All right. Some pattern making tutorials might say, oh, well, just draw a circle and then you're just going to make a circle. And, the human body, especially the human torso, is not a perfect circle. And anyone who tells you otherwise is just wrong. So I'm going to leave you with that. So what I'm going to do is I want to have more of the curve in the middle, a little bit lower, and then less of the curve toward the side. So I'm actually going to go ahead and match up the 0 mark here, and then I'm going to find where 7.625 ends. So let's see. All right, so it takes a little bit. Okay, cool. So 7.625 looks like it ends right about here. Just move that a little bit. Perfect. And now I'm going to take my chalk and just go ahead and draw right along here. All right. So now I want to double check and make sure that the line I drew is actually 7.625 inches, and for that, Luna Graphics has this amazing thing. This is called a CurveRunner. If you don't have one of these, you can go ahead and use measuring tape. And measuring tape, of course, is useful for so many reasons, especially for rent measuring. But the cool thing about the CurveRunner is you can actually make cool shapes and weird curves and all of that good stuff with your CurveRunner. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set my 0 right at where the arc that I made intersects with the line that I made. I set that at 0, and then I'm just going to roll this right along to the edge of the fabric. Oh, and I think that what I've made is just a little bit too long. So as you can see, it hits back over there. The circumference of this wheel is 8 inches. If it's hit the 0 again there, I know, hey, you know what, that's a little bit too long. So I can redraw my curve. just so that I know what's up, if you make a mistake when you're drafting a pattern, go ahead and erase it. This particular style of chalk doesn't erase very well, so what I do is I just cross it out, and then I'll just use another color and correct the line that I've made. So I'm off by about like 3/8 of an inch, just about 3/8 of an inch. So I'm gonna go ahead and rein that in just a tad. Okay, I'm gonna take my chalk marker. And why am I using this curve? Well, think about the shape of your body. Shape of your waist is not a perfect circle. So if you were to just go across or just make a perfect, you know, it's not gonna drape well when you put on the garment. When you use a curve like this, what you're doing is it's a more natural curve that more closely resembles the curve of your body. I don't know if you've ever seen a traveling science exhibit called Body Worlds. If you have, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it's in LA right now. I would encourage everyone who wants to buy a ticket and check that one out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and shorten my curve by just a teeny bit. Right, okay, cool, I think I'm good on there. Ready to go up just a tad. Cool. Now I'm just going to redraw my curve. Now I'm going to take my CurveRunner again to measure it and make sure that I'm very close to what my front waist measurement was. So I'm going to start at where the lines intersect. I'm going to roll this right along. And there we go. So is that it? 7.625. Let me double check. Again, much like woodworking, measure twice, cut once. Cutting fabric is a reductive process. You don't get any more fabric once you cut into it, and it is a pain in the butt to rectify things if you are wrong. Okay. All right, so this top curve, this is correct. And why am I only using half the front waist? Because I'm only going to make the front pattern piece. I'm going to make half of the front pattern piece. The reason why is so that one of my pattern pieces complete, I can go ahead and put this on the fold of whatever my final material is going to be, and it's not going to look great. Cool. So I know what my front waist measurement is, and now I'm making a circle skirt, right? So this is, by the way, another reason why some of those like tutorials that tell you, oh, just make a skirt, just make a circle and then make a circle that represents your waist, why those are wrong. Why you should use this method. Cool. So let me go ahead and give you a bit of a different view here. So you can see clearly what's going on. Just a tad. Okay, cool. So I've decided to make my circle skirt 18 inches long. So that'll fall somewhere between like my hips and my knees. So not too long, not too short. So the easiest, most common way to do it is starting at this pink line that represents the waistline. You are going to take a piece of measuring tape starting in the middle. You're going to go from, so you can see, okay, so you're going to put your measuring tape where the pink line is representing your waistline, and you're going to measure all the way down 18 inches, okay? And now you're going to move your measuring tape over just a little bit and go ahead and make another 18-inch mark. And then you're going to move your measuring tape over. And I advocate using a measuring tape for this step, or better than the measuring tape is to use a yardstick. The reason why is you want to keep the square end of your measuring tape right parallel with this line that represents your waistline. The reason being is since the human body is not a perfect circle, where the fall of this, where the drape of the skirt should end, it should end 18 inches from your waist. And this line that we've made represents your true waistline. So, and the reason why you want something super straight, these first couple marks I'm making that are basically right below the front, those are really easy, but it's as you get towards this curve that drapes upwards where having something rigid and flat will actually help you make more accurate lines. I've got this lovely Home Depot yardstick that I tend to use exclusively for this purpose. So again, I'm going to line this up so it's right parallel to this little curvy line. And then I'm going to move just like an inch over. And then I'm going to make another mark. And then I'm going to move it about an inch over, and then I'm going to make another mark. Okay, and then I'm going to move over just a little bit, make another mark. Then move over just a little bit, make another mark. And then from here at the edge, when I get to this point, I need to make another mark representing where the edge of that is as well. Okay. So, let's make sure that we're right on. Cool. So now I've got my curves, or I've got marks, right? So now the last thing that we want to do is we want to join all of the marks that we've made representing the edge of the skirt. We want to go ahead and use our marker. And sketch in where the edges are. Cool. And there's also another tool, also from Luna Graphics. This one is just like another curve tool. I really like using it just to true up some of the curves on this skirt. So I'm not amazing at sketching, but what this tool will help me do is make sure that as I join the lines, it's closer to like a smooth curve than my not so amazing, you know, short chalk marks. Okay, cool. So this is the front. I'm gonna go ahead and mark this now. And then I'm also gonna mark the grain line, so that I know when I'm done with this pattern, that's how I'm going to place this on my fashion fabric. But we're not done yet. So one of the things that you need to do before you finalize your pattern is you need to add a seam allowance to your material. Why are you adding a seam allowance now? Because eventually you're going to have to put it together, and having a seam allowance is crucially important so that everything comes together the way that it should. For this, I actually use a compass. All of the tools of math and science are the tools of sewing and fashion. Find a compass. You want one that has this nice little like screwing locking wheel so that everything stays accurate. I'm going to take my compass. I'm going to measure 5/8 of an inch from the pencil point to the little metal fixed point. I'm going to take my my compass. I'm going to take my straight edge. And I'm going to use the compass to draw in my seam allowance. So on the straight part, just a straight edge is fine. And you're just going to go ahead and draw right along the edge. It might be kind of difficult for you to see in this lighting. So I'm gonna go over it in pink so it's just more obvious. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I've got that. Now the other part that I need to mark with my compass is up here by the waistband, or by the top of the waist, because I mean, if you want to go for that look, you can, but I actually want to add a little bit of a waistband to this to attach a skirt around the waist. So I'm going to take my compass that's marked at 5/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to go right along the pink mark that represents the waistline, and I am going to mark my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance along the waistline. Okay, and let me draw that in, my pink, so it's easy to see. Okay, so now I have my waist circumference, and then I've got my seam allowance, so that when I cut it out and I start to join things at the seam allowance at 5/8, everything is going to match up nicely. And we're going to do the same thing for the bottom. For the sake of this video, I'm just going to move this up so you can see exactly what's going on. So again, we're going to take our compass. We're going to use the compass to mark where the 5/8 seam allowance should be. And by the way, when you use a compass to do this step, and when you draft a circle skirt in this way using your front waist measurement and a French curve, when you actually put the skirt on the mannequin, you are very much less likely to have to readjust the hem. This is another point where, you know, just make sure that when you cut this out of your fashion fabric that you're very accurate when it comes to your grain lines. So now that I've marked the 5/8 inch at the hem, I'm just going to go ahead and take a minute to connect the lines using my chalk marker so that I know where to cut for the front. Now, just because the waistline isn't shaped as a true circle does not somehow make this any less of a circle skirt. It's still a circle skirt, but it's a circle skirt that it's going to drape well on you and it's going to fit you properly. Okay, all right, so with that, we have finished the front pattern piece for our circle skirt, and this is just a single circle skirt. So I'll show you what's up with it's called a double circle skirt. Basically, it's a circle skirt with substantially more volume, and it takes a lot more fabric to make. So that's our front piece. Now I'm going to go ahead and drape, or not drape, but draft the back. So for this, so that's my front, and then I will just go ahead and do this as the back. Just pull off some extra threads, and we're going to draft the back in the exact same way that we drafted the front. So what we're going to do is we're going to, there we go, just like we did before, go ahead and make a mark to represent the top, kind of our guideline. Okay. So according to our measurements, our back waist is 13.25, so that is 6.625. Where is the where you want to go in terms of the length of this arc. So 6.625. 6. Let's see where that is. So from 0 to 6, I think we're right about there. Okay. All right, so I've used my curve to draw a back waist of 6.25 inches long, 6.65 inches long rather. And now to make sure that my measurement is true, I'm going to use my CurveRunner. Once again, I'm going to set that to 0 right at the middle. And I'm going to go right along the curve and make sure that my measurements are true, which they are. Awesome. And again, just like we did with the front, we're going to do this with the back. We're going to use our measuring tape to measure from the waistline down by 18 inches to mark where the hem of the skirt should fall. Go. And then just move along just a little bit. Okay. All right. Move this over just a bit, by 18 inches, so we're good on that. And then once more, we're going to connect our dots with our chalk marker so that we know that over. So there's my 18 inches. Pull. All right, and just like before, go ahead and grab our compass to draw in our 5/8 seam allowance. On the straight side, we can just use our straight edge. Just draw that guy in. Okay. On this curved side, again, we'll just take this and mark where the 5/8 should be. And then we'll take our marker, and then we'll go right along the edge to go over our seam allowance. So when we cut this pattern out, this is where we're going to cut. And then adding the seam allowance, when we put the two pattern pieces together, everything's going to look great. If you don't add a seam allowance in when you make your pattern, you are going to have mad fit issues. Make sure you add the seam allowance. Worst case scenario, if you add a seam allowance and maybe your garment comes out a little bit too big, it is vastly easier and more possible for you to make it smaller. If you've added no seam allowance and you sew your garment and you find that the garment is too small, it is nearly impossible to get your garment to be larger without altering the design that you've made fundamentally. So I'm going to throw that out there for all of you budding fashion designers. And again, we mark our grain line and then we just say what the back, is this the front or the back? If someone other than yourself is going to be using this pattern, feel free to mark the seam allowance on your pattern so that they also know what's going on. And then we're done. So these are the basic pattern pieces. I'm also going to add a waistband to this. And I think I'll make a separate video about that. Really easy. In this case, my waistband is just going to be a simple strip of fabric. So I'll go into the construction later and make a separate video about how to construct a waistband and how to put snaps and stuff on there. But this is just a quick Sunday activity for you. Now, one last thing that I want to do before I cut out my pattern is I'm going to go ahead and mark in the center here. Because I'm actually going to show you a second technique, I'm just going to draw in where my center line is. And then I'm going to make a note on the pattern piece that this is the center front. And I'm going to also mark on the pattern piece to cut it on the fold. Okay. All right, and then so my fronts and my backs are done. Cool. Now I just so happen to be the exact same size as my sample size, which is awesome for a number of reasons. If you only sew for yourself, do your best to find a mannequin that most closely approximates your actual body measurements. If you can, that would be great. If for whatever reason you can't find a mannequin that approximates your body measurements, here's what I suggest that you do, especially if you're losing weight, or if you're going to be engaging in exercise where you expect to have different body proportions. Maybe you can't find a mannequin that's exactly your size. Try to find a mannequin that might be 1 or 2 sizes smaller than you, 1 or 2 dress sizes smaller than you. And then once you find that mannequin, I strongly suggest that you go to YouTube and you type in the following words: how to pad for drag queens. And you'll find a myriad number of videos that will explain to you how to pad, if you are a drag queen, how to pad yourself to look more like a woman. You may not be a drag queen, and hey, look, even if you are, that's actually how you're going to pad your mannequin up in size to match your actual body sizes. I found that. I also live in Los Angeles, which is a city full of drag queens. So the common wisdom of drag queens pervades LA. It's kind of awesome on a lot of levels. But I think that's the best way to go about it. There's tutorials on like how to make your own mannequin out of like duct tape and like spray foam. And you know, some of my students have shown me those mannequins, and sometimes they're really good, but that really depends on who made them. For something functional that you can use for a long time, get a mannequin that might be a little bit smaller than you, and then pad your mannequin much like a drag queen would pad. So what I'm doing is I'm just cutting out my new pattern. And by the way, this is why you use super sharp scissors. If really you don't need to get fancy scissors when you're learning how to sew and when you're learning how to do fashion design. You don't need the most expensive scissors in the world. You don't need prestigious scissors in the world. What you need are sharp scissors. If you're not sure, get your scissors sharpened. I personally sharpen all of my scissors once a month, but I also sew a lot. I sew a lot. So I get all of my scissors sharpened at least once a month. Worst case scenario, they don't need sharpening, and the guy I take them to will hand them back to me. And think I'm a crazy person. But I would much rather have sharper scissors than dull scissors. When they're sharp, you get accuracy. When they're dull, bad things happen. Okay, so I've got my front and my back pattern piece. Oh, I'm gonna cut this guy off too. There we go. I am now done. So, for the purposes, getting this tutorial done fairly efficiently, I am going to quickly, probably just going to baste this together and then put it on the mannequin. Before I do that though, I want to show you how to make sure that after you've cut everything out, how to tell if your pattern pieces are correct before you get to the sewing machine. Where is my Sharpie? Okay, so I'm going to take a Sharpie marker. I'm going to make a little mark where the side seam meets the waist. Let's see, can you see that? Can you see that black dot? It's right there. So I've made a little black dot on the front, and then right here where the side seam meets the waistline, I'm going to put another black dot. Now before I stitch this together, I'm going to see if the length of this side seam is the same as the length of the side seam at the back where it's going to join. So I'm going to take where my two dots are and I'm going to match them up, and then I'm going to see where they land. And if they land in the same spot, then I've drafted my pattern accurately, and I can go ahead and use this to cut out my fashion fabric or whatever my final material is going to be. So in this case, they do match. So when I eventually sew this together, these two pattern pieces are going to match just perfectly. Alrighty, and through the wonders of editing and modern technology, I've cut out my skirt. I've got the front part of my circle skirt here. This is one of the great advantages of drafting a circle skirt in this way. When you look at the front, a lot of times, actually a lot of circle skirt tutorials have it, oh, just use a circle as your waistline, but then when you put on the skirt and you start walking, you get weird flaps of skirt between your legs, and it's gross and it doesn't look attractive. When you actually acknowledge that your torso is not a perfect circle, this is what you end up with. By having this longer line here, you actually get a really nice flat drape in the front. You get what you really want in the circle skirt, which is like this nice, very pretty drape on the side. So you can see this super awesome drape going on. And then when you look at the back, you actually get a really attractive back of the skirt going on. So I've marked in my grain line. I don't know if you can see that. I hope you can. So you can see kind of what the grain line looks like. And because we kept a 5/8 seam allowance, this line represents the true waist, and that's also where we're going to put a waistband. And I'll show you how to do that a little bit later. But there is how to make a circle skirt. For the purposes of illustration, I'm actually going to do a modification of a circle skirt. I'm going to do a double circle skirt, and this is actually in reaction to this post that I saw on Reddit's sewing forum, where a new sewist was like, oh, like I want to make a double circle skirt and I want to add horsehair to the bottom. You know, 'cause I'm assuming she wants a lot of the drama and volume that comes with that double circle skirt look, which is totally awesome. I heartily support this. I think it'll be an awesome skirt, but in her original post, she had described a method that her friend had told her to make this happen. And I want to take a moment to help her make an awesome double circle skirt and explain how you take this circle skirt and make it, you know, when you double the circle, you're adding twice the amount of volume. So I'm going to take a second to address that. So we're going to use our pattern that we made, the front and back, as the basis for our double circle skirt. So let me go ahead and explain the concept. I'm going to draw it out on a piece of paper. I'm going to show you how you can use this pattern to draft your double circle skirt and make them look pom-pom. Okay, so let me just explain the general premise of a regular circle skirt. Okay, so when we think about a regular circle skirt, just in general, we're thinking, okay, so we're gonna have a waist, or waist measurement. Okay. All right, so we're gonna call this line the waist, right? And then everything else around it is your skirt, right? So yeah, so basically this is our waist. And while we didn't use this particular method, I'm gonna actually fold this in half. Fold it in half again. In the middle so you get a better idea, right? Okay. So when we made our circle skirt, we, instead of using a round and very inaccurate shape for the waist, the modification that we made is we treat our true waist in the way that it is actually shaped by nature, which is more of an ellipse than a circle. So when we did our first pattern draft to make a regular circle skirt, so the front, whoops, I'm sorry. So this is our front. And this is our back pattern piece, right? So this is your single circle skirt construction. Then when you cut it out of the fold, pull it out, then you've got this whole circle going on. But what if you want to have a double circle skirt? So you actually want to have the same measurement at the waist, but you want a double circle skirt basically means that this outside circumference increases in size by 2, while the waist measurement stays the same. So the doubling that is referred to in a double circle skirt is this guy here doubles in size. So that is 2 times the circumference to do a double circle skirt. But how do you get to there from what we just made? And the easy answer is, see how these two represent, this is 90 degrees, this is 90 degrees. We're actually going to take our pattern piece and we're going to make this piece super long. We're going to double the size of this hemline, and we're going to preserve this waist measurement. So instead of 2 really easy pattern pieces, we're probably going to end up with 4 pattern pieces to achieve the doubling of the hem circumference while preserving the circumference here. So that's how you can make a double circle skirt while keeping a very smooth thing at the waist, lots of volume at the bottom. If you want to add pleats to it, you can. All right, so if we are going to do a double circle skirt, meaning the waist measurement stays the same, but the hem measurement doubles in size, we're actually going to use our regular circle skirt pattern to make that. So grab the front pattern piece of our regular circle skirt, and what we're going to do is we're going to find the midpoint of this of our front waistline. Okay, so if you take the front part of your circle skirt pattern and just fold it in half such that where the waist front ends, I'm just going to take just a straight pin just to pin it in place so we know exactly where it is. So you're going to mark that, fold it in half, take another straight pin just to mark where that is. Okay? And then I'm just going to use some chalk just to be a little bit more clear about where that is, right? So remember, when we make a double circle skirt, our goal is to increase the diameter of the hem while keeping the waist measurement the same as it was before. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to fold in. Remember that 5/8 inch seam allowance that we created? You're just going to fold that in. I like to use a straight pin just to kind of keep it in place while I work. If you're using paper, super easy, just fold over your seam allowance on the paper. And then I'm going to fold in the side seam allowance as well. I'm just going to pin it just a little bit. All right. So just like when we did our the first version of the circle skirt, we're going to take a straight edge and you're just going to mark right across the top. And we're going to use this as our guideline. Also, this is going to become one of our places where we need to add a seam allowance. So just like I did before, I'm going to go ahead and use my compass. Oops, let me move that down. To measure 5/8 of an inch. And because it's straight, I can just use my straight edge to draw in my seam allowance. Okay, so now the big difference between a regular circle skirt and a double circle skirt is instead of having a total of like 2 or 3, if you make the back 2 separate pieces instead of 1, instead of having just those 2 front and back pieces, you're going to end up with 4 pieces. So we've drawn in our guideline, but what we're going to do is we're going to take our, remember how we made that halfway point? You're going to take this, and you're going to align this. You're going to align the center front with the fold edge of your material, and you're going to align our halfway point that we drew with the guideline that we drew. So it's going to kind of cut right across just like that. Is it going to be at an angle? Absolutely. But you know, the angle that you're going to find between this edge and here is 45 degrees. And that's crucially important because that's how you increase the hem diameter by 2 while preserving the waist diameter at the same length that we measured before. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pin this down using a couple of straight pins. And then if you have tracing paper and a ponce wheel, again, this is an ideal application for it. I'm going to just go ahead and use my chalk because the vast majority of people seeing this video probably don't have the more specialized tools. And you know, I want to make sewing easy. I want to make sewing and designing something that you can do at home. You don't have to go to FIT, you don't have to go to some like crazy expensive university, especially if you just want to design stuff to sew for yourself at home. So I try to make my videos as accessible as is humanly possible, and part of accessibility means I'm not going to use a great many tools that I know to be very specialized, or you know, just really like, you know, stuff that you know you can't find at a Joann's. I'll try to avoid using those in my videos if I can. Okay. All right, so I've gone ahead and I've drawn in this curve just to make sure that the length is in fact 1/2 of the length of the original. Again, you can use the CurveRunner from Luna Graphics. I love this thing because it's awesome. Mark where the 0 is, roll it along the line. I see that it is exactly where I need it to be, which is 3.625. And that's great. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unpin this. And I'm going to draw in a seam allowance at the waist here. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the original pattern that I made, which is grab a ruler or a tape measure, and I'm going to measure out from here 18 inches all the way around. Oh, where's my tape measure? Okay. Right, where's my tape measure? Here's my marker. Here's my marker. Okay, so 18 inches. Again, from here to the hem, 18 inches. You're just gonna keep going around, 18 inches. It's gonna feel like you're not moving the top of this very much, and you aren't, to be totally honest with you. Match up the edge of your tape measure with the pink line that represents the waistline. Because you're doubling the circumference of the hem, where you find your 18 inches, one side of your tape measure is going to end up moving substantially more than the center part, but that is just a function of increasing the hemline without increasing the size of the waistline in the process. Okay, so let me start down here. Let's go 18 inches. It's going to take a little bit longer for you to do this as well. Again, that's part of the process. Okay. All right. So now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use a curve. In this case, I'm using the Luna Graphics curve to accomplish this, which is to just connect all the lines I just made at the hem. Oh, wait. I don't think you can see that. I think now you can see it. So I'm going to go ahead and use my curve. You know, the longer a curve you have, the better. Okay, so got that part done, and let me get down here. And this curve that you make will not be a perfect circle, and that is totally fine because we are making a double circle skirt, which means that you're only going to be doing like a fraction of the curve. You've got a longer diameter, which means that, you know, if you look at each curve, it's like, oh, wait, shouldn't it be more curvy? No, it shouldn't, not in this particular use case. And next, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish off the hemline and then finish adding my seam allowance. Awesome. So now I'm going to label this front A, right? And then just to make it easier for me to see, I'm just going to fill in a little bit on the lines. So we've got the front curve, right? So this is the first part of our double circle skirt. So this looks great. And then the other thing I'm going to do is, since I'm making a muslin, which is a demo garment, I'm going to go ahead and mark where the center front is, so that when I use my fashion fabric, I can go ahead and see where I should lay it on the fold. There's my straight edge. Here we go. Again, just take a straight edge. So this mark is my center front. Then I'm just going to put a cut unfold so that I know exactly where to cut. Oops, whoops, okay, that was totally not what I wanted. The beauty of sewing for yourself is when you make mistakes, you can correct your mistakes. So I'm going to cut that out. That's where I'm going to cut. Okay. When you are making a double circle skirt, you actually have two pattern pieces that form the front. So we're going to have two parts of the front. We're going to have front A and front B. So front A is complete. We're now going to move on to front B. Okay, and here, oh, forgot. Okay, and now at our hem, before I cut this out, I also need to add in my 5/8 seam allowance at the hem. So I'm just going to draw that in with my compass, which is set at 5/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to cut out that part of the pattern. Okay, I'm going to cut this side out. Such that they are distinct, I will go ahead and mark double circle. Okay, cool. So one of my two pattern pieces for the front, and for the back, we're going to do the same thing. Okay. Or rather, for the second half of the front, we're going to do the same method. So here's my front, this is the back, this is the front. Okay. So we did this section, and now we need to do this section. Because remember, we're making a double circle skirt. Same waist measurement, massive, 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 double the hem on the bottom. So we did this part. Now we need to do the part of the front that goes from the middle, from, I guess, right here to the edge. So just to make it a little easier on you. Let's see, make sure I've got enough material to do it. I do. Great. Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and put our guideline up at the top like we did with the other pieces. Go. Draw that guy in. So this is going to be our top guideline. I'm also going to put in another. I'm actually using this tool. You can find these at fashion supply stores, but I'm going to give you a pro tip. Buy this, it's called a T-square. It's a 90-degree square, kind of L-shaped looking ruler. Get it at Home Depot. Don't buy it from one of those like fashion supply stores. There is a very popular fashion supply store in my neighborhood, and that charges a whopping $55 for this same exact effing ruler, and it's maddening. Whereas if I go to Home Depot, I can get the same ruler for $8. What is the difference? The one at the fashion supply store is made out of aluminum, whereas this one is made of steel. The aluminum is a couple of ounces. This one, it's heavier, but it's not extremely heavy. What I like about this being heavier than the aluminum square rulers is I like that it's heavy enough to weigh down my material. So if I knock into it, if I tap it, it doesn't go flying. With the aluminum one, it's so light, it'll just glide across. I like having the extra weight because it's just more, it works for me in a practical way. So if you are learning to do fashion design and you don't have access to a fashion college or fashion school, go to Home Depot and buy one of these. It's less than $10 and it's great. Okay, so I marked my guidelines. And now, since we did this first part, we're gonna do the second part. So we're gonna take, pull that out. So we're gonna take this line from, remember how we folded this in half to do the first part? We're gonna go from here to here to do the second part of the front, right? So that's where the center is. I'm gonna find where the edge is, where that black dot is. And we're just gonna put it right on top of our material, right in that corner. I'm gonna pin it into position so I know where I'm gonna trace in the line. Okay, let me make sure this is nice and flat. And if we were to fold this over, the angle here should be about 45 degrees. So if you have tracing paper and a ponce wheel, do that. If you don't, use a chalk marker and just pin your original pattern piece on top of this new piece. And then just go ahead and trace. Okay. And just like we did with the other one, just to make sure that they're the same length, again, you can use a measuring tape for this. I'm going to use the Luna Graphics CurveRunner to do this because it's more accurate. And I'm going to measure from the end to that center point, okay? And then I'm going to make sure that whatever that measurement is the same as this measurement that I traced over. Cool. And we're good. All right, so I'm going to call this B. And you're going to mark your grain line just the same that you would, you know, in any other case. I'm going to call this front B. And just like we did before, you're going to measure from the waistline down 18 inches. Because remember, we wanted an 18-inch long skirt, right? Okay, so we're going to mark that. So 18. And up here near the waist, you're not going to move your measuring tape or your straight edge all that much. Why? Because you are doubling the circumference of the hem of your skirt while keeping the waist the same measurement. So as you mark the hemline, this side is going to move a lot more than up here. Okay, and once you've marked your hem, again, just go ahead and you can freehand draw it, that's fine. I prefer to just kind of lightly sketch it out freehand and then use one of my French curves to true up the curve of the hem. Okay. And then again, if you use your set of curves, since we've doubled the length of the hem, it's not going to seem quite as curvy, and that is fine. If it doesn't seem as curvy as our original circle skirt, that is what happens when you increase the diameter of a circle. It seems a little bit less curvy. Okay, so I've got that. And just like I did before on the other pattern pieces, I'm going to use my compass to go ahead and draw in my 5/8 seam allowance. And on this pattern piece, since it's not going to be cut on the fold, you have to draw in your 5/8 seam allowance at the hem and on the center front and the sides of this particular pattern piece. The center front you can cut on fold with a double circle skirt, but the side fronts you can't do that because they're not. That's just not the way. That's just not how it's going to work. I'm just letting you know. Okay, and then again down here. I'm going to go ahead and draw in my 5/8 inch seam allowance. And then on this side, since again it is mostly straight, I'll take my straight edge and my compass and just draw in my 5/8 seam allowance. Okay. Now that that is drawn in, I can go ahead and cut out my pattern, which includes the seam allowance. There we go. Generally speaking, by the way, just because the periscope medium is very expositive, generally I say don't lift up your fabric while you're cutting, but I can't really move my camera around all that much, so I move my fabric just so you can see what's going on. Cool. So I've got my front pattern piece, and then I'm going to have my side front pattern piece, like so. And okay, so now here's what we're going to do. So you can see what's going on. So I've got my front. I've got my side front pattern piece. Oh, wait, can you see it? I don't really know. I think you can. I'm going to assume that you can see this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to match these up at the side seam. You know they're the same size. Good, good. And just so you can see what's up, I'm going to pin these together. So that you can see that I have kept the waist measurement the same while increasing the hem diameter by double. Okay. All right. So to fold down the front and side seam allowances. So get a little distracting, right? Okay. All right, so remember our front pattern piece? So here's our center front. Here's the side seam. This is our original front on a regular circle skirt. Now when we overlay the center front of our double circle skirt, oh, I didn't cut it off. Let me cut that. So when I overlay this, I'm going to pin it on so you can see exactly what I see. Not stitched this together on the sewing machine yet. Just want to show you what the difference is. Come on, get in a position. Now it's where it needs to be. All right, so the first thing you're going to notice right off the bat is the lengths of these two skirts are identical. They're both 18 inches. The waistlines are identical. They are both 18 inches. So the waists are the same, and the length is the same. But since you have double the volume at the bottom, you get a more fluffy skirt. So I'm going to put this on the mannequin so you can see what this looks like in practice, and then you can see how it compares to the regular circle skirt. All right, so now that I've put everything up on the mannequin, here's the result of what we just did. So this is our original circle skirt. When we did the front, again, this is all one pattern piece. You get one front and it extends to here, right? Which is awesome for a circle skirt. This is exactly what you want, because when it comes down, you get this nice, very soft drape. But if you want to do a double circle skirt, doing a double circle skirt, when you come out here, you get a lot more, there's more textile involved, there's more fabric, and instead of one pattern piece, you have two. So let me show you what that looks like. So here, on a double circle skirt, you have increased the hem circumference by 2, right? So if you were to pull it totally flat, this is what it's going to look like. So, you know, it's super, super long and extended. The hem circumference on your double circle skirt is twice what the regular one is. But on a double circle skirt, what you'll notice is the waist measurement here, this doesn't change at all. So the measurement here from here to the side is identical as the waist measurement from here to here. If you look at this closely, even though there's 2 pattern pieces, there aren't any pleats, there aren't any folds or anything like that going on over here. But by taking this pattern piece and instead of making it 2 pattern pieces, you're able to increase the hem length. When you cut everything on grain, by the time you get to about the sides or about a quarter of the way in, you get this really beautiful drape. So if you're doing something like formal wear, where you want to have a lot of volume at the bottom of your skirt, this is the way to do it. You get a lot of volume at the bottom, but you're able to preserve what's going on in the middle of, if it's a dress, doing your double skirt, circle skirt this way, you're able to keep a nice, slim, sleek waistline without adding a whole lot of fabric to it. Some people say, oh, well, if you want to do a double circle skirt, then add a bunch of pleats. Adding pleats to the waistline here, what that's actually going to give you is just a more bulky waistline. In my opinion, it doesn't look good, but it also depends on the type of fabric you're using. If you're using a very thin material, you can probably get away with it. But I just find that this gives you a really good looking line, really good looking skirt. Especially if you have a circle skirt where you really like the design, but you just want to add more drama. This is a good way to add drama without complicating the design too much by adding pleats. So I hope this has been really helpful for you. Enjoy your weekend. Happy Memorial Day. Make some skirts. It'll be awesome.